For 10 years she cleaned the hallways where no one saw her, but on the day it all came crashing down it was her voice, steady, with proof in her hands and dignity in her eyes, that saved the company, and the man who once ignored her began to follow her with his heart. On that overcast November morning in Chicago, the corridors of Harrison Holdings felt colder than usual. The tense air mingled with the faint scent of lavender that always followed the young woman on the cleaning staff. Emily Smith walked with a light step, her head down but her ears sharp. For 10 years that marble floor had known her tired feet and calloused hands, but no one had ever noticed her watchful eyes, green as emeralds, holding secrets no one could imagine, not even him. At 26, Emily had learned to be invisible. Her fair skin, often flushed from the sun when she cleaned the exterior windows, contrasted with her brown hair, always pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her delicate features, which in another life might have graced magazines, remained hidden beneath the humility of someone born in a working-class neighborhood on the South Side. Her shy smile rarely made an appearance, but when it did, it lit up everything around her like sunbeams breaking through the clouds. The owner of the company, William "Will" Harrison, an imposing 32-year-old man, lived surrounded by figures, meetings, and sycophants. Behind his perfectly trimmed beard and impeccable suit hid an exhaustion no one dared to mention. His blue eyes, the color of the sky over Lake Michigan on a clear day, reflected a loneliness that neither money nor power had managed to fill. His empire, built with sweat and discipline since he inherited the company from his father at 25, was quietly trembling, corroded by hands that seemed loyal. He didn't know it, but she did. She knew about every fraud, every embezzlement, every criminal whisper between the glass walls that, for her, were never obstacles, but windows into what should be right. For months, Emily had been collecting everything. With her phone hidden in the pocket of her navy blue smock and a memory trained by hardship and repetition, she recorded voices, photographed contracts left on desks, and pieced together a puzzle that only she had the courage to solve. No one imagined that the simple young woman, whose eyes held more sleepless nights than dreams, held the salvation of the company. She wasn't seeking revenge. What moved her heart was justice, and perhaps deep down, an almost childlike hope of finally being seen, not as a useful shadow, but as a whole woman with value and dignity. Emily's story had begun in a small brick bungalow on the South Side, where she lived with her mother, Mary Ann, a strong woman who worked as a seamstress, and her younger brother, Sam, a 16-year-old who was in high school thanks to the money she contributed. Her father, Robert, had died in a construction accident when she was 15, leaving the family with debts and an uncertain future. "Honey," her mother had told her one night, sewing a dress by the light of an old lamp, "dignity isn't something you buy or sell. You carry it inside, right here." And she had touched her heart with her hand, wrinkled from years of hard work. Those words had marked Emily more than any other advice. Every morning when she got up at 5 to be on time at Harrison Holdings, she remembered those words as she braided her hair in front of her bedroom's cracked mirror. The Harrison Holdings building rose imposingly in the Chicago Loop, its 20 stories of glass and steel reflecting the Midwestern sky. It was a company that had expanded across the United States, with branches from Seattle to Miami, specializing in real estate development and construction. Will had inherited the business from his father, Mr. Alexander Harrison, a respected man who had built the empire from scratch, but had died when Will was just 25, leaving him with an overwhelming responsibility. In the travertine marble hallways, the offices with panoramic city views, and the boardrooms with imported mahogany tables, Emily moved like an efficient ghost. She knew every corner, every schedule, every executive's habit. She knew that the CFO, Richard Miller, a 50-year-old man with a prominent belly and a fake smile, always arrived at 7:30, half an hour before everyone else, to review special matters in his office. She knew the chief accountant, Patricia Vance, an elegant 45-year-old woman, stayed after 6 to make confidential calls to numbers Emily had memorized. And she knew that they both met on Friday afternoons in the 18th floor boardroom, when Will was usually out in the field, supervising construction sites. Everything changed that November morning when Will walked into the boardroom and found the shareholders waiting for him with cold stares. The numbers didn't add up, the contracts were missing, and his name was about to be dragged through the mud. Panic was reflected in his blue eyes as he reviewed the documents they presented. "Will," said Mr. Michael Anderson, the largest shareholder after him, a 60-year-old man with impeccable grey hair and an authoritative voice, "the numbers for the last 6 months don't match. We're short $3 million, and the contracts for the Naperville development have vanished. If this gets out to the media, the company will go bankrupt." That's when she walked in. Emily had been cleaning the adjacent hallway when she heard the agitated voices. Her heart was beating so fast she feared it could be heard. For weeks she had been debating whether to speak up. Who would believe her? A cleaning lady accusing the company's top executives. With a hesitant step and a trembling voice, she asked for permission to speak. The silence was deafening. Some shareholders exchanged looks of disbelief. Richard Miller, who was present, feigning concern, let out a dismissive laugh. "Are we seriously going to listen to the cleaning girl?" he said with a cruel smirk. "She should be more concerned with cleaning the bathrooms properly. I found paper towels on the floor yesterday." Emily's cheeks burned with shame, but something inside her ignited as well. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You carry dignity inside, right here." She lifted her gaze, and for the first time in 10 years, everyone in that room truly saw her. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice firmer now, pulling a worn blue folder, a flash drive, and a hardcover notebook from her backpack. "I have evidence of what's really happening in this company." The air grew thick. Will stared at her, and for the first time, Emily felt someone saw her not as an employee but as a person. Her green eyes met his blue ones for an instant that felt like an eternity. "I've been collecting proof for months," she continued, opening the notebook where she had meticulously noted dates, times, and conversations. "Mr. Miller and Miss Vance have been diverting funds to personal accounts. I have recordings, photographs of documents, and records of their transactions." No one breathed as she spoke. With each piece of evidence presented, the color drained from faces. Richard turned pale when she played a recording of him talking about moving the money before Will figures it out. Patricia tried to get up and leave, but Mr. Anderson stopped her with a stern look. Will watched Emily with a mixture of shock, admiration, and something deeper he couldn't quite identify. The woman who had gone unnoticed for 10 years had just saved his company, his reputation, his future. But more than that, she had just shown him a courage he thought was lost in the world. The next few hours were a whirlwind. The police were called. Richard and Patricia were arrested. The media swarmed the building's entrance. And Emily, after giving her statement, tried to slip away as she always did. But this time, Will stopped her. "Emily," he said, and it was the first time she heard her name on his lips. His voice was deep, warm, but also vulnerable. "I need to talk to you." She nodded, not daring to look at him directly. He took her to his office on the 20th floor, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows showing the entire Chicago skyline. The walnut desk was covered in papers, family photos, and a small plant that she herself had cared for years without him knowing. "Why did you do it?" he asked, pouring her a cup of coffee into a porcelain cup she had cleaned hundreds of times. Emily took the cup with trembling hands. It was the first time she had sat in that office, the first time someone had served her anything, the first time she felt treated as an equal. "Because it was the right thing to do," she answered simply, her voice barely a whisper. "This company means a lot to many people. The workers, the families who depend on these jobs, the people who buy the homes you build. I couldn't stay silent and watch them destroy it." Will fell silent, observing her. For the first time he truly noticed her features, the most expressive green eyes he had ever seen, the small but strong hands, the way her brown hair framed her face when a few strands escaped her ponytail. She was beautiful in a natural, unadorned way, with the kind of beauty that comes from within. "For 10 years you were here," he murmured, more to himself than to her. 10 years, and I never really saw you." Emily smiled sadly. "People like me are used to being invisible, Mr. Harrison. We clean, we fix, we take care of things, but we exist in the spaces between the important lives." "Will," he corrected her gently. "Call me Will. And I think I've been completely wrong about what makes a life important." The days that followed were strange for both of them. At Will's request, Emily was relieved of her cleaning duties and assigned as his direct personal assistant. Some employees whispered, others remained silent, but she didn't need to prove anything to anyone but herself. Her first week in the new position was terrifying. She had never used a computer beyond the basics, never been in business meetings, never had to make decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But there was something about Will that put her at ease. He was patient when she didn't understand a financial term, included her in conversations, and valued her opinions, especially when it came to understanding the real needs of the workers. "You have a perspective that none of us has," he told her one afternoon as they reviewed the budget for a housing complex in Evanston. "You know the people who will actually live in these homes. You know what they need." Emily blushed. "I just know what it's like to live with little and appreciate every single thing you have." But with the changes came fears. There were nights she cried alone in her small room in the family home, remembering the times she was ignored, the mended clothes, the bread split with Sam when there wasn't enough for both. Was she now at the top because of her own merit or out of charity? Did she really belong in this world of expensive suits and business lunches? One night, while working late organizing documents, Will approached her desk with 2 mugs of rich hot chocolate, the kind you only get on a cold Chicago night. "It's getting very late, Emily. You should get some rest." She looked up, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you, but I want to finish this. We have the meeting with the Naperville investors tomorrow." Will sat in the chair opposite her desk, something he had never done with any other employee. "Can I ask you something personal?" Emily nodded, feeling her heart speed up. "What's your family like? I realize you never talk about them, but I know you work so hard for something more than just yourself." Emily's eyes filled with unshed tears. No boss had ever asked about her personal life. To them, employees were just that. Employees, not people with stories, dreams, and responsibilities. "My mum, Mary Ann, is a seamstress," she began slowly. "She has arthritis in her hands, but she keeps working because my brother Sam is in high school and wants to study engineering. My dad died 11 years ago in a workplace accident. Since then, I've been helping support the house." Will listened in silence, and Emily noticed something in his blue eyes she hadn't seen before, a deep understanding, as if he too knew the weight of early responsibilities. "My father died young too," he said after a moment. "I was 25 when I inherited all this. I felt so lost, so inadequate. Everyone expected me to be like him, but I barely knew who I was myself." For the first time, Emily saw Will not as the powerful businessman, but as the vulnerable man hiding behind the power. That night they talked late, sharing stories of their respective childhoods, their fears, their deferred dreams. Who could have imagined that the salvation for both of them would come in the form of a conspiracy that would test them in ways neither could anticipate? Chapter 2. The following weeks brought changes Emily had never imagined. Her new office, though modest compared to Will's, had a window overlooking Millennium Park, and for the first time in years, she could see the sky during her work hours. She had traded her cleaning uniform for simple but elegant blouses she'd bought with her first increased paycheck, and although she felt like she was playing a part, she was slowly beginning to believe she belonged there. Will had insisted she take computer and business administration classes in the evenings. "Not because you aren't capable just as you are," he had explained as they walked through the corporate gardens after a long meeting, "but because I want you to have all the tools to shine, as I know you can." The way he looked at her when he said those things made Emily's heart flutter in ways she didn't fully understand. There was an intensity in his blue eyes, a warmth that contrasted with the corporate coolness he showed the rest of the world, but not everything was peaceful in her new life. The whispered comments in the hallways were constant. "Look at Princess Cinderella," she heard Sandra, the new HR secretary, say. Sandra was a 30-year-old woman with an air of superiority who had studied at private universities, from scrubbing floors to sitting in board meetings. How convenient that she was the one who uncovered the corruption, don't you think? The words hurt more than she wanted to admit, but she had learned to hold her head high. Her mother had always told her that envy was the tribute mediocrity pays to talent, though at that moment, Emily felt less like a talent and more like an imposter trying to fit into a world that wasn't hers. One December afternoon, while organizing documents for the quarterly meeting, a man arrived at the office who would change the course of everything. Edward Sullivan, 45, had been a minority partner in the company years ago, before Will bought out his share after a dispute with Will's father. Tall, with salt and pepper hair, and a calculating smile, Edward had returned with a proposal that he claimed would save the company from future crises. "Will, my dear friend," Edward said, striding into the main office as if he owned the place, without even glancing at Emily, who was organizing files near the desk. "I've come with an offer you can't refuse. I want to buy 40% of the company's shares." Emily immediately noticed the tension in Will's shoulders. She had learned to read his gestures during the weeks working so closely with him. When he was nervous, he ran a hand through his hair. When he was thinking strategically, he tapped his fingers on the desk. And when something bothered him, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Edward," Will responded in a controlled voice, "the company isn't for sale, especially not after what we've just overcome." "Precisely because of it," Edward insisted, sitting down uninvited and spreading a folder across the desk. "The investors are nervous. The internal corruption has damaged our image. You need fresh capital, and more importantly, you need partners with experience in crisis management." Emily continued with her work, but every fiber of her being was on high alert. There was something in the way Edward spoke that reminded her of Richard Miller, That excessive confidence bordering on arrogance, that way of talking as if he already had everything figured out. Besides, Edward continued, finally directing a dismissive look at Emily, I see you've made some interesting changes to your staff. Don't you think it's time to further professionalize operations? Will followed Edward's gaze, and Emily felt as if she'd been slapped. She had gotten used to Will treating her as an equal. She had forgotten for a moment that to the rest of the world she was still the cleaning lady who got lucky. Emily is my executive assistant, Will said with a firmness that surprised both men, and one of the most valuable people in this company. Her judgment and her ethics are exactly what we need to keep growing. Edward smiled, but it was a cold smile. Of course, Will. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Your loyalty to the employees who have helped you is admirable. The word loyalty sounded almost like an insult on his lips. Emily felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. She had faced worse. Over the next few weeks, Edward became a constant presence in the offices. He would arrive unannounced, sit in on meetings he wasn't invited to, and make subtle comments about the need to modernize the company. Every time he did, his eyes would land on Emily with a mixture of contempt and curiosity, as if she were an object out of place. It was during one of these visits that Emily witnessed a conversation that deeply alarmed her. She had been working late, as was her custom, when she heard voices in Will's office. She approached the ajar door to let him know she was leaving, but stopped when she heard the tone of the conversation. It's not just about the money, Will, Edward was saying. It's about control. Your father understood that. He knew that sometimes you have to make tough decisions for the greater good. My father would never have sacrificed employees for profits, Will answered, his voice tense. Oh, really? And you think those affordable housing projects you're so proud of are profitable? Do you think your dear assistant understands the complexities of the real estate market? You're letting emotions cloud your business judgment. Emily felt a knot in her stomach. Edward wasn't just attacking the company's direction. He was attacking her indirectly. Emotions have nothing to do with this, Will said, but Emily detected a sliver of doubt in his voice that hadn't been there before. Emily has shown more business acumen than many of the executives with university degrees we've had. Will, you're my friend, and that's why I'm telling you this. You're mixing business with other feelings. People are talking. They're saying your relationship with that girl goes beyond professional. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily felt as if the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Was it true? Did people really think there was something more between her and Will? And more frighteningly, was there? In the following days, the dynamic between Will and Emily subtly changed. He became more formal, maintained more physical distance, and they no longer stayed late working and talking as they had before. Emily wondered if Edward had planted seeds of doubt in Will's mind about her true motivations. The situation became even more complicated when Sam, her younger brother, came to the office one day to see her. At 16, he was a tall, lanky kid with the same green eyes as Emily, but with the restless energy of adolescence. He had come to tell her he had won a partial scholarship to study engineering at the University of Illinois, but needed help with additional expenses. "Sis," he said excitedly as they waited for the elevator in the lobby, "I can't believe you work up here now. It's like a dream." Emily smiled, genuinely happy for the first time in days. Her brother represented everything she had been fighting for, a better future for her family. "I'm so proud of you, Sam. Dad would be—" "Emily?" They turned to find Will getting out of the elevator. He was wearing a dark grey suit that highlighted his blue eyes, and Emily noticed how her brother unconsciously stood up straighter in the presence of the man he had seen in newspapers and business magazines. "Will, this is my brother Sam," Emily said, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. "Sam, this is Mr. Harrison." "Will," he corrected, extending a hand to the young man. "Emily has told me a lot about you. Congratulations on the engineering scholarship." Sam shook his hand with a shy smile. "Thanks, sir. My sister says you're a good boss." Will looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Your sister is exceptional, Sam. Any company would be lucky to have her." After Sam left, Will and Emily rode the elevator up together in a silence that felt heavy with unsaid words. "He's a good kid," Will finally said. "He's my everything," Emily replied simply. "He and my mum are the reason I do everything I do." Will watched her with that intensity that made her feel as if he could see straight into her soul. "Have you ever thought about what you want for yourself, Emily? Not for your family, not for others, but for you?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that. Since her father's death, her entire life had revolved around caring for others, securing her family's future. I don't know," she admitted honestly. "I've always been the responsible one. I haven't had time to think about my own dreams." "Maybe it's time you start," he murmured, and something in his voice made Emily's heart beat faster. That night, in her small room in the family home, Emily lay awake thinking about Will's question. What did she want for herself? For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of possibilities that went beyond basic survival. She imagined traveling, studying, maybe even truly falling in love. But along with those dreams came the fears. Edward was right about one thing. She didn't have the formal education that others in her position had. What if Will realized she really wasn't good enough for the world she now moved in? Her fears were confirmed in the cruelest way possible the following week. Edward had organized a business dinner at the Union League Club of Chicago, one of the most exclusive venues in the city. Will had insisted that Emily accompany him, saying her perspective on the affordable housing projects would be valuable for the presentation. Emily had bought her first elegant dress for the occasion, a simple but chic navy blue dress that enhanced her green eyes. She had styled her hair in a low bun and wore the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. She felt beautiful, but also terribly out of place. The club was everything she had imagined. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves serving glasses of wine that cost more than she used to make in a day. The guests were the most powerful business people in Illinois, men and women accustomed to moving millions of dollars with a simple phone call. At first, everything seemed to be going well. Will introduced her with pride, and several investors showed genuine interest in her ideas about building accessible housing. Emily began to relax, to feel that maybe she did belong there. That's when it all fell apart. During the presentation, as Will was explaining the company's new projects, one of the investors, Arthur Miller, cousin of Richard, the corrupt former CFO, rose from his seat. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrison," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "but before we talk about new projects, I think we should clear up some rumors that are circulating about your company." The room fell silent. Will looked at Arthur with a cautious expression. "What kind of rumors?" "Rumors about favoritism towards certain employees," Arthur continued with a malicious smile, "and about how some people have risen through the company using unconventional methods." Emily felt as if the floor had opened up beneath her. She knew exactly what he was referring to, and from the glances that started to shift her way, so did everyone else. "My cousin Richard told me a very interesting story before he was unjustly incarcerated," Arthur went on, "about how a cleaning lady conveniently discovered evidence that incriminated the people truly responsible for the finances, thus saving her boss's reputation and securing her own promotion. "That's enough," Will said in a dangerously low voice, but Arthur wasn't finished. "I have to wonder," he said, looking directly at Emily, "how long were you planning this masterstroke? Was it your idea, or did you have help orchestrating Richard and Patricia's fall?" The silence in the room was deafening. Emily felt the stares of everyone present, piercing her like knives. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands began to tremble. "Miss Smith," Arthur continued relentlessly, "went from cleaning bathrooms to sitting in board meetings in a matter of weeks. How convenient that all this happened just when the company needed a scapegoat and a redemption story." "Enough," Will shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair tipped over. "I will not allow you to insult." But Emily couldn't take any more. The tears she had been holding back began to stream down her cheeks. Without a word, she grabbed her purse and ran out of the room, ignoring Will's shouts calling her name. She ran through the club's hallways, past surprised doormen, and didn't stop until she reached the street. Only then did she realize it was raining, and she didn't have money for a cab back home. But she didn't care. The cold rain mixed with her hot tears as she walked through the streets of Chicago, her blue dress soaking wet, her new shoes filling with water. She had fooled herself into thinking she could belong in that world. Arthur was right. She was just a cleaning lady who had gotten lucky. How had she been so naive to think that someone like Will could truly see her as his equal? When she finally reached her house on the south side, it was past midnight. Her mother was waiting up for her, and without asking any questions, wrapped her in a towel and made her a cup of chamomile tea. "Honey," she said softly as Emily sobbed in her arms, "the strongest storms are the ones that come before the most beautiful dawns." But that night, Emily couldn't imagine how any dawn could ever be beautiful again. Chapter 3. The days following the humiliation at the club were the darkest Emily had lived through since her father's death. She didn't go back to work. She didn't answer Will's calls. She didn't leave her room except to use the bathroom. Her mother and Sam took turns bringing her food she barely touched, worried about the silence that had replaced the strong sister they knew. "Emily," her mother said on the third day, sitting on the edge of her bed, "tell me what happened." Between tears and broken words, Emily told her everything: the dinner, Arthur's accusations, the public humiliation, and above all, the terrible certainty that maybe he was right. Maybe it had all been too convenient. Maybe Will had promoted her out of pity, not merit. "Oh, honey," Mary Ann sighed, stroking her daughter's hair. "When did you learn to be so hard on yourself? You saved that company because it was the right thing to do, not for personal gain. Courage isn't measured by the money in your bank account or the degrees on your wall." "But, Mum," Emily sobbed, "they're right. I don't have the education. I don't know their world. I don't know about finance or management. What was I doing pretending I could be like them?" Mary Ann took her daughter's face in her calloused hands. "Listen to me, Emily Smith. Your grandmother once told me the story of a seed that fell on rocky ground. Everyone said it would never grow, that it needed fertile soil and special care. But that seed had something the others didn't, the determination to grow against all odds. When it finally blossomed, its beauty was more stunning than any garden flower because it had fought for every single petal." That same afternoon, as Emily remained in her room, mulling over her mother's words, she heard voices in the living room. She crept to the door and immediately recognized Will's deep voice speaking with her mother. "Mrs. Smith," he was saying, "I need to talk to Emily. It was a terrible misunderstanding, and I can't let her feel this way over something that wasn't her fault." "Mr. Harrison," her mother replied with her natural diplomacy, "my daughter is very hurt. That man humiliated her in front of a lot of important people. I know, and I hate myself for not being able to protect her better, but she needs to know the truth about what happened after she left." Emily felt a flicker of curiosity despite her pain. What had happened after she fled the club? "After Emily left," Will continued, "I stood up and told everyone there exactly what I thought of their insinuations. I explained how she had risked her job and her safety to save the company, how she had gathered evidence for months without asking for anything in return. I told them that if they had a problem with my way of recognizing true merit, they could find other companies to do business with." "And what did they say?" Mary Ann asked. "Most of them apologized. It turns out Arthur Miller has his own financial problems and was trying to discredit the company to force a cheap sale. Several investors approached me afterward to ask if Emily would be interested in consulting for their own companies." Emily felt a mix of relief and confusion. Was it possible that not everyone thought ill of her? "But that's not the most important part," Will continued. "The important thing is that I realized something that night. I realized I can't imagine my life without Emily, not just as an employee, but as a person, as the extraordinary woman she is." Emily's heart stopped. Had she heard correctly? "I'm in love with her, Mrs. Smith," Will said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know you might think it's inappropriate, that we're from different worlds, but in these past months, I've discovered that what really matters isn't where you come from, but who you are. And Emily is the bravest, most principled and most beautiful woman I have ever met." Emily covered her mouth to stifle a sob, tears streaming down her cheeks, but this time they were different tears. "Mr. Harrison," her mother said after a pause, "my daughter's heart doesn't belong to me, but I can tell you that these last few months have been the happiest I've seen her since her father died. Talk to her, but be patient. Wounds of the soul take longer to heal than those of the body." After Will left, promising to return the next day, Emily emerged from her room for the first time in days. Her mother greeted her with a knowing smile. "Did you hear everything?" she asked. Emily nodded, blushing. "And what does your heart say?" "My heart says a lot of things," Emily murmured. "It says that he's wonderful, that these months working by his side have been the best of my life. But it also says I'm scared, Mum, scared of not being enough for his world." "Honey," Mary Ann said, taking her daughter's hands, "true love doesn't know about social classes. Your father was a mechanic, and I was a market vendor when we met. He was ashamed of his greasy hands, and I was ashamed of my stained apron. But we loved each other with a strength that moved mountains. Love isn't about being perfect for each other. It's about being authentic." That night, Emily looked at herself in the mirror for the first time in days. Her green eyes were swollen from crying, but behind the pain she saw something that had been there all along. Strength. The same strength that had led her to gather evidence against corruption. The same strength that had made her work double shifts to help her family. The same strength she had inherited from generations of resilient women. The next day, when Will arrived at her house with a bouquet of wildflowers, not expensive roses, but the kind of flowers that grew in the fields where they built the affordable homes, Emily met him at the door. "Hi," he said simply, and in that one word there was an apology, a promise, and a question. "Hi," she replied, and for the first time in days, she smiled genuinely. They sat in the small backyard, under the lilac bush her father had planted years ago. The purple flowers created a sort of natural, private, and intimate canopy. "Emily," Will began, "I'm so sorry for what happened at the club. I should have protected you better." "It's not your fault," she said. In a way, Arthur Miller was right. I'm a cleaning lady who ended up in a place she doesn't belong. No, Will said firmly, taking her hands in his. You're an extraordinary woman who is exactly where she's supposed to be. And if the world can't see that, then the world needs to change, not you. Emily felt the warmth of his hands, the sincerity in his blue eyes. Will, she murmured, we're from very different worlds. You have a college degree, connections, money. I barely finished high school and come from a humble family. Do you know what I admire most about you? He said, moving closer. That you've never let your circumstances define your character. You have an education you don't get in universities. The education of the heart, of knowing what's right and having the courage to stand up for it. That's worth so much more than any degree. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to truly look at him, not as her boss or the unattainable man she had admired from a distance, but as Will, the man who had fallen in love with her, not in spite of who she was, but because of who she was. I love you too, she whispered finally, the words coming out like a breath she had been holding for months. Will smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile Emily had ever seen. Slowly, he leaned in until their foreheads touched. I've loved you since the day you walked into that boardroom with your blue folder and saved my world, he murmured. But I fell in love with you long before that, when I saw you taking care of the plants in my office, without knowing I noticed, when I heard your soft laugh in the hallways, when I saw how you treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, full of months of pent-up feelings. When they pulled apart, Emily had tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of happiness. What are we going to do? She asked. People will talk. They'll say it's inappropriate. Let them talk, Will said with a mischievous grin. But if you're worried about what they'll think, I have a proposal to make. He stood up, and to Emily's absolute astonishment, knelt before her. From his pocket, he took out a small velvet box. Emily Smith, he said, his voice trembling but firm. Will you marry me? Not because it's convenient for business, not because I need to save you or you need to be saved, but because I can't imagine building my future with anyone else. Emily looked at him, unable to believe what was happening. The ring was simple but beautiful, a single solitaire that sparkled like her tears of joy. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, yes. As Will placed the ring on her finger, Sam and Mary Ann appeared from the house, where they had obviously been spying on the proposal. Sam cheered, and Mary Ann cried with joy. Welcome to the family, son, Mary Ann said to Will, hugging him. But as they celebrated in the small backyard of the humble house, none of them knew that Edward Sullivan was plotting something that would test not only their love, but everything they had built together. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 4. The months following the engagement were a roller coaster of emotions for Emily and Will. They had decided to keep their relationship private for the time being, not out of shame, but to allow their love to grow without the pressure of public scrutiny. In the office, they maintained impeccable professionalism, though the glances they exchanged were laden with shared promises and tenderness. Emily had flourished in her new position. The night classes she was taking in administration and finance were beginning to pay off, and her unique perspective on the real needs of working families had revolutionized the company's housing projects. Will had officially named her Director of Social Development, a position created specifically for her that combined her natural abilities with her growing technical knowledge. Look at these numbers, Will had told her one February afternoon, showing her the resident satisfaction statistics for the new housing complexes. 95% satisfaction. That's practically unheard of in affordable housing developments. Emily smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. It's because we actually listen to what families need. Green spaces for kids to play, proximity to public transit, designs that maximize natural light. It's not magic, it's common sense. Your common sense, he corrected her, leaning in to gently kiss her forehead. Though they were alone in the office, they kept these small displays of affection discreet. But happiness has a cruel way of attracting storms. Edward Sullivan had been seemingly absent for the past few weeks, but as Emily would soon discover, he had been very busy weaving a web of lies and half-truths that threatened to destroy everything she and Will had built. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a phone call Emily received at home on a Sunday morning. The voice on the other end of the line was unfamiliar, but the words chilled her to the bone. Miss Smith, this is a reporter from the Chicago Tribune. We're investigating some irregularities at Harrison Holdings and would like to ask you a few questions about your meteoric rise in the company. Emily hung up immediately, but the damage was done. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. How had they gotten her personal number? What kind of investigation were they doing? She called Will immediately, but his phone was off. He was in Naperville supervising the construction of a new complex, and the signal in that area was notoriously bad. Anxiety gnawed at her as she waited for news from him. She didn't have to wait long. On Monday morning, she arrived at the office to find Will at his desk, with an expression grimmer than any she had ever seen. Spread out in front of him was the morning paper, and although Emily couldn't read the headline from where she stood, she knew from Will's tense posture that the news was not good. "Will?" she said softly, approaching him. "What's wrong?" He looked up, and Emily saw in his blue eyes a mixture of pain, confusion, and something that looked like doubt. "Emily," he said in a hoarse voice, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." The tone of his voice made a knot form in Emily's stomach. "Of course, I've always been honest with you." Will turned the newspaper so she could see the headline. The bold black letters seemed to leap off the page. "Millionaire CEO in scandal, romance or ruse, the truth behind the corporate Cinderella's rise." Emily felt as if she had been punched in the gut. With trembling hands, she took the newspaper and read the article, which essentially shredded her reputation and called her motives into question. Worse, it insinuated that Will had been manipulated by a calculating woman who had used his vulnerable position to seduce him and secure her financial future. "This is a lie," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Will, you know this is completely false." "That's what I want to believe," he said, and those words were like knives in Emily's heart. "But there are things in this article, details that only someone very close to us could know." Emily read more closely. The article mentioned private conversations they had had, details about their secret dates, and it even knew about the engagement ring. Someone had been spying on them, documenting every intimate moment. "How could they know these things?" she murmured, more to herself than to Will. "That's the exact question I've been asking myself all night," he replied. "And there's something else, Emily. Edward came to see me last night." Emily's heart sank even further. She knew Edward would bring nothing good. "What did he want?" Will stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to Emily. "He said he'd been investigating your past because he was concerned about me. He said he'd discovered some inconsistencies in your story." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Emily asked, though a part of her dreaded the answer. Will turned to face her, and in his eyes was a sadness that terrified her. "He told me your father didn't die in a construction accident, Emily. He told me he died in prison." Emily's world stopped. The air became thick, unbreathable. All the words she wanted to say, all the explanations, got stuck in her throat. "Will," she finally managed to whisper, "I can explain." But he held up a hand to stop her. "Edward had documents, Emily. A death certificate, prison records. Your father, Robert Smith, died in the Joliet Correctional Center after being convicted of fraud and embezzlement at the construction company where he worked." Tears were now streaming freely down Emily's face. The secret she had kept for 11 years, the secret that had tormented her every day of her life, had finally come to light in the cruelest way possible. "Yes," she murmured, her voice breaking. "It's true." Will closed his eyes as if the words had caused him physical pain. "Why did you lie, Emily? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Because I was scared," she sobbed. "I was scared you would think I was like him, that corruption was in my blood. I was scared you wouldn't believe me when I reported Richard and Patricia." "And what else have you lied to me about?" Will asked, his voice now cold, distant. "If you could hide something so fundamental about your family, what else is there that I don't know?" Emily felt as if the floor had opened up beneath her feet. "Nothing else, Will. I swear. That's the only lie I've ever told you." "The only one?" Will's voice was laced with disbelief. "Emily, your father committed the exact same type of fraud that you exposed in my company. Don't you see how convenient all of this is?" "What are you implying?" Emily asked, though a part of her already knew where the conversation was headed. "I'm implying that maybe Edward is right. Maybe you knew about Richard and Patricia's corruption for a long time. Maybe you waited for the perfect moment to discover it and become the hero. Maybe this was all a carefully orchestrated plan to get exactly what you've gotten." Every word was like a slap. Emily couldn't believe that the man who claimed to love her, the man who had known her heart for months, could think so poorly of her. "Do you really believe that about me?" she asked, her voice cracking. Will ran his hands through his hair, clearly tortured. "I don't know what to believe, Emily. You've lied to me about something fundamental. The media is suggesting you've manipulated me. Edward has documents that seem to back up his version, and now I find out that your father—" "My father was a good man," Emily interrupted firmly, finding strength in her pain. "Yes, he made a mistake. He got involved with the wrong people and made the wrong choices. But he wasn't a criminal at heart. He was a desperate man trying to feed his family. She moved toward Will, but he stepped back, and that small gesture hurt more than any word. My father got involved in the fraud because his boss at the construction company threatened to fire him if he didn't participate, she continued, the words tumbling out. We had medical debts from my grandmother's surgery. Sam was just a baby, and Mom couldn't work. Dad thought he could pay the money back before anyone noticed, but they found out. Will listened in silence, but his expression remained closed off. He died in prison because he had a weak heart and didn't get proper medical care, Emily went on, her voice now barely a whisper. But before he died, he made me promise that I would always do the right thing, no matter the consequences. He made me promise that I would never let desperation lead me down the wrong path like it did him. And that's why you reported the corruption in my company? Will asked, his voice softer but still distant. I reported the corruption because it was the right thing to do, Emily said firmly. Because I watched my father destroy himself by taking the easy way out, and I couldn't stay silent watching others do the same. Not for revenge, not for personal gain, but for honor. The honor my father lost and that I've been trying to reclaim my whole life. Will was silent for long minutes. Emily could see the internal battle reflected in his blue eyes. I need time to process all of this, he said finally. I need to think. Will, Emily pleaded, don't let Edward destroy us. He's behind all of this, can't you see? The newspaper articles, the documents about my father. He's trying to tear us apart. Maybe, Will admitted, but that doesn't change the fact that you lied to me about something so important. I lied because I love you, Emily said desperately, because I was afraid of losing you. And by lying to me, Will replied sadly, you've achieved exactly what you feared. Will walked out of the office, leaving Emily alone with her pain and her tears. She knew he was right to be upset about the lie, but she also knew that Edward had manipulated the situation to achieve this exact outcome. That afternoon, as she packed her personal belongings from the office, she knew she couldn't stay after everything that had happened. She received an unexpected visitor. Edward Sullivan walked into her office with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Smith, he said with false cordiality, I'm so sorry about this whole unfortunate situation. Emily looked at him with contempt. Unfortunate? You orchestrated all of this. Edward shrugged. I just presented the facts, my dear. Will deserve to know the truth about the woman he was planning to marry. And what's your real motive, Edward? Emily asked, confronting him. Why do you care so much about destroying my relationship with Will? Edward's smile turned crueler. Because Will is making the same mistakes his father did, letting emotions cloud his business judgment. His father nearly lost the company by being too soft, too trusting. I won't let Will do the same. This isn't about the company, Emily retorted. This is about control. You want to control Will, and I'm a threat to that control. Very perceptive, Edward admitted. But it's too late. Will has seen your true nature. He's seen that you're capable of lying and manipulating when it suits you. And what about your own lies? Emily shot back. Do you think Will won't eventually find out that you were the one who leaked the information to the press? Edward smiled confidently. By the time that happens, if it ever does, I will have already secured my position in the company, and you'll be back where you belong, cleaning bathrooms. After Edward left, Emily sat at her desk one last time and wrote a letter. Not to Will, she knew he needed time and space, but to herself. A letter where she promised that no matter what happened, she would not let this experience make her give up her values or her dignity. That night, in her small house on the south side, Emily told her mother and Sam the whole truth about the lie she had told about her father, about Edward's manipulation, about the breakup with Will. Honey, her mother said after hearing the whole story, your father wasn't perfect, but he was a good man who made a mistake in a moment of desperation. You have honored his memory by living with integrity. Don't let the actions of others tarnish that integrity. But I lost Will, Mum, Emily sobbed. I lost the man I love because I couldn't be completely honest with him. If he really loves you, Sam said, taking his sister's hand, he'll find a way to understand why you did what you did. And if he can't, then maybe he wasn't the right man for you. But as Emily tried to find comfort in her family's words, she didn't know that Edward had one final blow prepared that would test not only her resilience, but that of her entire family. The real hell was just beginning. The next day, Emily received a call that would take her breath away. It was Sam's high school principal. Miss Smith, the formal voice on the phone said, we need to speak with you about your brother's scholarship. Some irregularities have arisen in his file that require immediate clarification. And it was then that Emily understood the true cruelty of Edward Sullivan. He hadn't been content to destroy her relationship with Will. Now, he was coming for her family. Chapter 5. The principal's office at Lincoln Park High School felt smaller than it really was, as Emily and Sam sat across the worn oak desk. The principal, a 60-year-old man with thick glasses and a serious expression, had a folder in front of him that seemed to hold Sam's future. "Miss Smith," Principal Davis began, "we've received an anonymous tip suggesting that the documentation submitted for Sam's academic excellence scholarship contains irregularities." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of irregularities?" The principal opened the folder and took out several documents. "According to the information we received, the family income reported in your scholarship application doesn't correspond with your actual income. It is alleged that you, as Sam's sister and legal guardian, have been receiving a significantly higher salary in recent months and failed to report it on the application." Sam looked at his sister, his eyes filled with panic. The scholarship not only covered his tuition, but also included a monthly stipend that helped them with basic household expenses. Losing it would mean the end of his college dreams. "It's true my salary recently increased," Emily admitted, "but the scholarship application was submitted before that increase. All the documents we provided were truthful at the time of application." "I understand," the principal said, but his tone suggested skepticism. "However, according to the institution's policy, any significant change in family income must be reported immediately. Failure to do so constitutes a violation of the scholarship's terms." "But I didn't know," Emily started to say, but she stopped. Technically, she had been so overwhelmed by the changes in her life that she had indeed forgotten to update Sam's scholarship information. "Furthermore," the principal continued, pulling more papers from the folder, "the person who provided this information also suggests that your promotion at Harrison Holdings was irregular. If that's true, it could affect the validity of your new salary position." Emily immediately recognized Edward's hand in all of this. He hadn't just destroyed her relationship with Will, now he was directly attacking her brother's future. "Principal Davis," Emily said with all the dignity she could muster, "I understand your concern, but I assure you that my promotion at the company was completely legitimate. I am willing to provide any documentation you need to prove it." "I'm afraid the matter is more complicated than that," the principal replied with a sigh. "The institution's board has decided to temporarily suspend Sam's scholarship while the situation is fully investigated." "Suspend?" Sam spoke for the first time, his voice breaking. "But if my scholarship is suspended, I won't be able to pay for this semester's tuition. I'll lose the school year." "I'm very sorry, young man," the principal said with genuine compassion. "I understand this is difficult, but we must follow the established protocols." When they left the high school, Sam couldn't hold back his tears. He was a strong kid, used to life's hardships, but watching his college dreams crumble was more than he could bear. "Sis," he said as they walked down the gritty streets toward their house, "maybe I should just drop out and get a job. That way, I could help with the bills." "Don't you dare!" Emily exclaimed, stopping in her tracks. "You are going to finish high school, and you are going to go to college. I don't care what I have to do." "But how are we going to pay for it?" Sam asked desperately. "Without the scholarship, we need $500 a month just for tuition, not counting books and supplies." Emily had no immediate answer. Her job at Harrison Holdings was a thing of the past after everything that had happened with Will. She would have to find another job, but with all the negative publicity she had received, who would hire her? That night, as Sam studied in his room, trying to hold on to hope against all odds, Emily sat at the kitchen table with her mother to review their finances. The numbers were daunting. "With what I have saved, we can pay for 2 months of tuition," Mary Ann said, taking out a small tin box where she kept her life savings from years of work as a seamstress. "After that, I'm not letting you use your retirement savings," Emily protested. "There has to be another way." Just then the phone rang. Emily rushed to answer it, hoping it was news about a job she had applied for that afternoon. "Emily!" It was Will's voice, and it sounded as broken as she felt. "Will," she whispered, her heart leaping despite everything that had happened. "I just found out about Sam's scholarship," he said. "Emily, this has to stop. Edward has gone too far." "How did you find out?" she asked. "Because he told me himself," Will replied bitterly. "He came to my office this afternoon, proud of what he'd done. Said it was necessary to teach you the consequences of deceiving your superior." Emily felt a mix of hope and pain. "And what did you say to him?" "I told him he was a monster," Will said, his voice ironclad. "I told him it's one thing to have issues with me, but it's another thing entirely to attack an innocent kid. I told him that if he didn't reverse what he'd done, I would personally see to it that his true motives were exposed." And what did he say? He laughed, Will said with disgust. He told me it was too late, that the damage was done. He said that if I tried to help you or your family in any way, he would make sure the media presented it as further evidence of your manipulation. Emily closed her eyes, feeling trapped in a web with no apparent escape. Emily, Will continued, I need you to know something. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, about the lie you told me about your father. Emily's heart raced. And I realized I was a hypocrite, he admitted. I have secrets about my family too that I never told you. Things I'm ashamed of, things I thought might change the way you see me. What do you mean? Will sighed deeply. My father wasn't the saintly businessman everyone thinks he was, Emily. Yes, he built this company from scratch, but he did it using methods that weren't always ethical. He bribed inspectors, intimidated competitors, exploited workers. When I inherited the company, I spent years trying to clean up the legacy he left behind. Emily was speechless. The reason I reacted so badly when you told me about your father, Will continued, is because I saw my own fears reflected back at me. The fear that our parents' sins will define us. The fear that people will judge us for things we couldn't control. Will, Emily murmured, tears streaming down her cheeks. I love you, Emily, he said, his voice fierce. I love you exactly as you are, with your past and your secrets and your fears. I was a fool to let you go. I love you too, she sobbed. I never stopped loving you. Then help me fight Edward, Will said. Help me protect your family and take back what belongs to us. But before Emily could answer, she heard an insistent knock at the door. When she opened it, she found two men in cheap suits, who she immediately knew were police officers. Emily Smith, the taller one asked. Yes, she replied, fear coiling in her stomach. You're under arrest for fraud and forgery. Emily's world collapsed. Through the phone, she could hear Will shouting her name, but the officers were already cuffing her. Emily! Sam yelled from his room, running toward the door. Stay with Mom, she shouted back as the officers led her to the squad car. Call Will. As the car pulled away from her house, Emily saw her mother and Sam huddled in the doorway crying. Her heart broke as she realized Edward had finally achieved what he set out to do, completely destroy her life. At the police station during the long hours of interrogation, Emily learned the true extent of Edward's revenge. Not only had he filed charges for alleged forgery in Sam's scholarship application, but he had also claimed that she had used privileged company information for personal gain. Miss Smith, said the detective in charge, a tired man who had clearly seen many similar cases, the accusations against you are serious. Forgery, fraud, insider trading. If you're found guilty, you could face up to 5 years in prison. This is all revenge, Emily said for the 10th time. Edward Sullivan is behind all of this because he wants to destroy my relationship with Will Harrison. That may be, the detective admitted, but he has documents, testimonies, evidence. We need more than just your word to prove it's a conspiracy. That's when Will arrived, accompanied by the best defense attorney in Chicago. Seeing his face, full of determination and love, gave Emily the first real hope she had felt in days. Don't worry, he whispered in her ear when he managed to hug her briefly. We're going to fight this together. Edward made a mistake by getting the law involved. Now we have to play by the rules, and in that game, the truth always wins. But as they waited at the police station for the lawyer to arrange Emily's bail, neither of them knew that Edward had one last card to play, a revelation that would test their love in ways they had never imagined. Because the darkest secret wasn't about either of their pasts. It was about the present, and about a connection between Edward and Emily's family that would change everything they thought they knew about their story. The real battle for their love and their future was about to begin, and the price of victory might be higher than any of them was prepared to pay. Chapter 6. Bail was posted at dawn on Tuesday, but Emily walked out of the jail a different woman. The 24 hours in a holding cell had given her time to reflect on everything she had lost and everything still worth fighting for. Will was waiting for her outside with clean clothes, hot coffee, and a steely determination that shone in his blue eyes. "How are Mum and Sam?" were Emily's first words. "Worried but strong," Will answered, helping her into his car. "Your mother told me something last night that I'll never forget." "What did she say?" "She told me that the best flowers are the ones that grow in difficult soil because they develop deeper roots." Will took Emily's hand in his. "She said you're the most beautiful flower she's ever seen grow because you've blossomed in spite of everything you've faced." Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks, but for the first time in days, they were tears of hope. During the drive home, Will explained what he had been doing while she was arrested. "I hired a private investigator to look into Edward. If he's really behind all of this, he must have left a trail." "Did they find anything?" More than we expected, Will said with a grim smile. Turns out Edward has his own financial secrets. He's been funneling funds from his other investments to finance this campaign against you. But that's not the most important thing we found. Will paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Emily, there's something about Edward you need to know. Something that explains why he's so obsessed with destroying you. What is it? Edward knew your father. Emily felt as if the air had been sucked out of the car. What do you mean? Your father, Robert, didn't just work for any construction company, Will explained slowly. He worked for a subsidiary of Harrison Construction, a subsidiary that Edward was managing at the time. Emily's world tilted. That's impossible. My father never mentioned... Because he probably didn't know the connection, Will continued. Edward operated through several shell companies. But the records are there, Emily. Your father was arrested for a fraud that Edward orchestrated. Your father was the scapegoat for Edward's crimes. Emily felt a mixture of rage, grief, and a terrible dawning comprehension. That's why he hates me so much. It's not just about you and me. It's about my father. He's afraid I'll find out the truth about what really happened. Exactly, Will confirmed. And now that we know, we can fight back. When they arrived at the house on the south side, Mary Ann and Sam rushed out to embrace Emily. For long minutes, the three of them held each other, crying, feeling whole as a family for the first time in days. Honey, Mary Ann said, pulling back to look at her daughter, I have something to tell you. After you were arrested last night, I was going through your father's old things, and I found this. She handed Emily an old shoebox she recognized immediately. It was where her father kept important papers. I never fully opened it after he died, Mary Ann admitted. It was too painful, but last night, I thought there might be something in here that could help you. With trembling hands, Emily opened the box. Inside she found letters, photographs, and at the bottom a sealed envelope with her name written in her father's handwriting. What is this? She murmured. Your father told me that if anything ever happened to him, I should give you that letter when you were old enough to understand, her mother explained. Emily carefully opened the envelope. The letter was dated 2 weeks before her father's death. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you to protect and guide you as I should. I know I have failed as a father, that my mistakes have brought pain to our family. I want you to know the truth about what happened. I didn't mastermind the fraud I was arrested for. I was forced to participate by a man named Edward Sullivan, who threatened to hurt your mother and you if I didn't do what he asked. I have proof hidden in the yard, under the rosebush I planted when you were born. I didn't seek justice when I was alive because I was afraid of retaliation against you. But someday, when you're strong, maybe you can use this information to clear my name and protect others from men like Edward. I love you more than my own life, sweetheart. Be the brave woman I already see in you. Your loving dad, Robert. Emily finished the letter with tears streaming down her face. Will, who had been reading over her shoulder, was already moving toward the door. Where's that rosebush? He asked. Minutes later, the four of them were in the small backyard, carefully digging around the rosebush Robert had planted 26 years ago. It was Sam who found the metal box buried 3 feet deep. Inside the box were photographs of documents, recordings on old cassette tapes, and correspondence that proved unequivocally that Edward had been orchestrating fraud through multiple companies for years, using vulnerable employees like Robert as scapegoats. This is more than enough to clear your father's name, Will said, looking through the documents, and to put Edward in prison for a very long time. But Emily knew Edward wouldn't give up easily. A man who had waited decades to take revenge on a family he saw as a threat wouldn't stop at anything. Her premonition was confirmed that very afternoon. Edward showed up at their house, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought 2 men with him, whom Emily recognized as hired thugs. Miss Smith, Edward said with his usual cold smile, I trust you enjoyed your brief stay in jail. It was just a taste of what's to come. Edward, Will said, stepping out of the house to confront the man who had caused so much pain. It's over. We have proof of everything you did. The fraud, the manipulation, what you did to Emily's father. It's time for you to pay. Edward laughed, but there was no humor in it. That old junk you dug up, please. Documents that have been underground for decades have no legal standing. Besides, who's going to believe the word of a convicted felon's daughter over mine? I'll believe her word. Everyone turned to see Mr. Michael Anderson, the majority shareholder of Harrison Holdings after Will, getting out of a luxury car, accompanied by a notary public and 2 police officers. Mr. Anderson, Edward said, clearly stunned. What are you doing here? I've come to witness the truth, the older man replied with dignity. After Will told me what he'd discovered about you, I did some digging of my own. I found several irregularities in the company's accounts during the years you were a partner. I also found evidence that you've been blackmailing other employees in the same way you blackmailed Miss Smith's father." Edward turned pale, but tried to maintain his composure. "That's ridiculous. You have no proof of anything." "Actually, I do," said Mr. Anderson, handing a folder to the notary. Patricia Vance, the former accountant who was arrested with Richard Miller, decided to give a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. She told us how you forced her to participate in the fraud by threatening to have her undocumented husband deported. Edward's mask finally crumbled, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "You'll all pay for this," he screamed, signaling to the thugs with him. But before they could move, the police officers who had arrived with Mr. Anderson already had their weapons drawn. "Edward Sullivan," one of the officers said, "you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, blackmail, and obstruction of justice." As they led a handcuffed Edward away, he looked at Emily with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he yelled. "You'll always be a criminal's daughter. You'll always be inferior." Emily stood tall with all the dignity she had inherited from generations of strong women. "My father was a good man who was manipulated by a criminal," she said, her voice clear and firm. "And I am a woman who fights for justice. If that makes me inferior in your world, then I don't want to belong to it." After Edward was taken away, the family gathered in the living room with Will and Mr. Anderson. The air felt lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. "Miss Smith," Mr. Anderson said, "on behalf of the board of Harrison Holdings, I want to offer you a formal apology for everything you've endured. We also want to offer you your job back, with a pay raise and an even higher position." Emily looked at Will, who nodded with a smile. "The decision is yours," he said. "I accept," Emily said, "but on one condition. I want to establish a fund for the families of employees who have been victims of workplace extortion or blackmail. And I want my father's name to be officially cleared from all company records." "Done," Mr. Anderson said immediately. After everyone had left, Will and Emily sat alone in the small yard under the lilac bush. The sunset painted the Chicago sky in shades of gold and pink. "You know what's the most incredible thing about all this?" Will said, taking Emily's hand. "What?" "That in the end, it was your father's love that saved us all. His letters, the proof he kept. He did it all to protect you even after he was gone." Emily smiled, feeling her father's presence closer than ever. "He always told me that the truth has its own strength. You just have to be patient and brave enough to let it shine." "So what now?" Will asked, playing with the engagement ring he had put back on her finger that morning. "Now we get married," Emily said with a radiant smile. "Now we build the life we dreamed of together. Now we help other families like mine find justice and dignity. And now we live happily ever after," Will asked with a mischievous grin. "Now we live happily ever after," Emily confirmed, sealing the promise with a kiss under the purple flowers that had witnessed so much pain and now blossomed in the promise of so much love. 6 months later, Emily and Will were married in a simple but beautiful ceremony in the garden of the house where she had grown up. Sam, now with a renewed full scholarship and accepted into the University of Illinois, was the one who walked his sister down the aisle. Mary Ann cried tears of joy as she watched her daughter walk toward the man who loved her exactly as she was. Emily's wedding dress had been sewn by her mother, with fabric Will had insisted on buying, but with the design and love that only a mother's hands can provide. It was simple, yet elegant, like everything Emily represented. In his vows, Will promised to love Emily for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, in days of glory and in days of hardship. But he added something more. "I promise to always see you as the extraordinary woman you are, never for where you come from or what you have, but for the light you carry inside and the strength of your heart." Emily, with tears of happiness, promised to love him with the same strength she had used to fight for justice, with the same determination she had used to protect her family, and with all the honesty she had learned from the mistakes of the past. "I promise to be your partner in every dream, your support in every struggle, and your love for all the days God grants us together." After the ceremony, as the guests, a mix of business executives, company employees, neighborhood friends, and family, celebrated in the yard decorated with lilac blossoms and warm lights, Emily sat for a moment alone under the rosebush her father had planted. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, touching the soft petals, "for protecting me even when you were no longer here, for teaching me that mistakes don't define a person, but how they rise after they fall." Will came up behind her and hugged her gently. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we've come," Emily answered, leaning back against his chest. "A year ago, I was invisible to the world. Today, I'm your wife and the director of a program that helps families like mine. And tomorrow," Will said, kissing her hair, "we'll be whatever we decide to be together." 5 years later, Emily and Will had transformed not only Harrison Holdings, but the entire construction industry in Illinois. Their ethical housing program had won national recognition, and the Robert Smith Fund for Victims of Workplace Extortion had helped over 500 families find justice. Sam had graduated with a degree in civil engineering and worked at the company designing sustainable housing. Mary Ann had opened a sewing workshop that employed single mothers from the neighborhood, financed by the foundation Emily and Will had established, and in the office she had once cleaned, Emily now sat as the Vice President of Social Development, making decisions that affected the lives of thousands. On her desk were 3 photographs, one from her wedding to Will, one of her entire family, and one of her young father holding her as a baby. Every morning before starting work, Emily took a moment to remember where she came from, not with shame but with pride, because her story wasn't about a Cinderella who needed rescuing, but about a woman who had the courage to rescue herself, and in the process had also rescued the man she loved. The small house on the south side was never sold. It had become a gathering place for the family, where Will learned to make pies with Mary Ann, where Sam studied surrounded by his sister's love, and where Emily and Will planned their future as parents. Because after 5 years of marriage, Emily was expecting their first child, a baby who would grow up knowing the story of their grandparents, who would learn that dignity isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the strength of character, and who would understand that true love knows no social class. The day Emily told Will about her pregnancy, they were sitting in the same spot where he had proposed. Under the lilacs that had now grown so large, they formed a complete natural canopy. "Do you know what I want to name the baby?" Will asked, placing his hand on Emily's still flat stomach. "What?" "If it's a girl, Hope. If it's a boy, Robert," Emily cried, but they were tears of the purest happiness. Her father would live on not just in her memory, but in the new generations that would carry forward the values he had tried to teach her. "Hope Roberta," she said finally, "because she'll carry both names. Hope for the future we built together, and Roberta for the past that gave us the strength to get here." And when Hope Roberta Harrison was born 9 months later, it was in the same hospital where Emily had been born 27 years earlier. But this time there were no worries about how to pay the medical bill. This time there was only love, hope, and the certainty that this little girl would grow up in a world where her worth would be measured not by her last name or her bank account, but by the strength of her heart and the clarity of her spirit. The night they brought Hope home, the whole family gathered in the yard. Mary Ann held her granddaughter while Sam played the guitar he'd learned in college. Will had his arm around Emily, and for the first time in many years she felt completely at peace. "What are you thinking about?" Will asked, recognizing that contemplative look he loved so much. "That in the end, it all made sense," Emily replied, looking at her daughter asleep in her grandmother's arms. "All the tears, all the struggles, all the sleepless nights wondering if I was good enough, it was all to get to this moment." "And if you could change anything about our story?" Will asked. Emily thought for a moment, looking at her family gathered under the Chicago stars. "I wouldn't change a thing," she said finally, "because the hardships made us stronger, the mistakes made us wiser, and the pain made us appreciate the happiness even more." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to Sam's soft music and the night sounds of the neighborhood where it all began. "You know what I love most about our story," Will said finally. "What?" "That it didn't end when we got married. That every day we write a new chapter together." Emily smiled, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "And you know what the next chapter is going to be?" "What?" "The chapter where we teach our daughter that she can be anything she dreams of being, that she can love whoever her heart chooses, and that it doesn't matter where she comes from, but where she's going." "That's going to be the most beautiful chapter of all," Will murmured, kissing his wife's head. And so, under the lilac bush that had witnessed so much pain and so much joy, the family born from the purest love continued to write their story, a story that had begun with tears and struggle, but would continue for generations with love, hope, and the unbreakable belief that every person deserves to be seen, valued, and loved for who they truly are. Because in the end, that was the most important lesson Emily and Will had learned, that true love isn't about changing to be worthy of someone else, but about finding someone who sees you completely and loves you exactly as you are. And they lived happily ever after, not because their life was perfect, but because they faced every imperfection together, with love, dignity, and the certainty that they had found in each other not just a soulmate, but a best friend, their biggest supporter, and their greatest love.